Welcome and good afternoon. My name is Kamish Orr, and today I thought I would take some time to talk about how I'm going to be adding the Japanese baseball team, the Yomiuri Giants, and the Negro League team, the Homestead Grays, to my Triple-Elimination tournament that I'm doing with History Maker Baseball as one of the projects coming up. If you want to find out more detail about the setup of that league, you can check out the latest video that I posted. That goes into more detail on how that league is being set up, the Triple-Elimination tournament, and so forth. So just to recap, very briefly, I'm doing a Triple-Elimination tournament here with all of the Major League Baseball franchises using the History Maker Baseball all-time franchise great sets that I have purchased. And that gives you 30 teams, of course. And to round out the 32 team brackets, if you will, I decided to add one team, the Yomiuri Giants, or Tokyo Giants, into the league, and the Homestead Grays, which are a Negro League baseball team, to give me 32 teams. Now, a question arose about using some kind of all-star team from the Japanese League or all-star team from the Negro Leagues. And since I'm using franchise teams in this replay or in this Triple-Elimination tournament, I thought it would almost be unfair to take an all-star team from those leagues and insert them into this since none of these are all-star teams by any means. Though obviously some franchises have deeper teams than others. I may in the future decide to try something like that with Major League all-star teams and all-star teams from the other leagues as well. But for this replay or this project, I thought I would go with the top teams from those other leagues. And both of those teams have the most championships, long histories, notable players, and so forth. So it seemed interesting, and I think will work well for this bracket. In terms of seeding, the teams are set up based on their franchise winning percentage. That's how they're seeded, and separated by American and National League. So the American League bracket has the 16. We'll have the 16 American League teams, which I've added the Giants into this league, into the American League. And then in the National League, I've added the Homestead Grays into the National League side to give 16 teams there as well. And that just makes the brackets work better, I think, without any first-round buys and that kind of thing. But then the question arose of how to handle the Homestead and Yomiuri Giants teams, since they are from a different league. They have carded sets that I was planning on using originally, and those carded sets, which were created by members of the community. The Japanese all-time franchise greats set was actually originally done by Michael Forbes, I believe, and the Negro League all-time franchise greats were originally done by Jeff Drought. I hope I'm pronouncing those names correctly. And they are available through the History Maker Baseball Facebook group, so you can find them easily there. The Delphi forums, I believe they're probably out there somewhere. But anyway, so that's what I was originally going to use. And then I thought more about it and thought that I would use Major League equivalency of the players on those teams rather than the straight card sets from those particular sets. And the reason for that is, and there may be some disagreement on my reasoning for this, but my reasoning is that those card sets were really designed to be played amongst themselves or with themselves. So you could have a whole Japanese league tournament, for example, or some kind of series or something like that with Japanese League teams solely or Negro League teams solely. And so the stats that they that those players had were within those leagues, and therefore, if you did a replay using those cards, would come up realistically for those leagues. But in this case, we're bringing those teams over to a Major League Baseball setup or world, and so I felt the need to do a little bit of Major League equivalency to bring those teams over here, so that everybody would be on a kind of an even playing field, if you will. For example, Sadaharu O, who is on the Giants, he hit more than 50 homers. He set the league record, of course, in home runs. However, if he had played in the major leagues, the Japanese players tended not to hit so many home runs when they come over to the major league. So there has to be some accounting for that. Same with the Negro Leagues. The Negro League teams, there's been a lot of discussion. You can find it online about how well they would have done if integration had taken place earlier. How well would a Josh Gibson, for example, have done if he were facing major league pitching and that kind of thing. And some of the numbers they put up are mind-boggling, but that's because some of the competition they were playing against weren't major league quality. There wasn't major league quality competition in all cases in those cases. So now, of course, those players are still Hall of Fame caliber players, not detracting at all from their play or their abilities. But I think there needed to be some kind of adjustment made. And fortunately, there's been a lot of conversation about how to make those adjustments. The actual adjustments themselves, though, were tough for me to find. I figured that somebody out there would have already come up with major league equivalencies for the particular leagues. But my problem was I was trying to find player-specific equivalencies for maybe a specific year, rather than their full career, because that's the way the other cards in the all-time franchise great sets are done, is they're based on a particular season. And so that was a little bit harder to come by. But I did find some information that I thought I would share if anybody wants to go down that route too, to save them a little bit of time. And so let me talk about each of those leagues separately. The first I will speak about is the Japanese League. And that, one of the top writers on this is Jim Albright over at baseballguru.com. He has a whole page where he goes into detail analyzing different Japanese players, how they would do in the major leagues and that kind of thing. How was Sadaharu O's career had he played in the major leagues instead of in the Japanese leagues, for example? How many home runs would he have hit? And through a lot of statistical analysis, we're able to come up, I think, in the ballpark of where those players would have landed. Now, the problem is that, again, not all of the Japanese players have detailed major league equivalencies, but there's a little bit of basis for me to go on, I think, in analyzing these. In fact, Jim Albright himself has done an analysis of some of the top players and some of the top seasons from these players, and using his formulas and his process, he's come up with major league equivalencies for some of their seasons. And so that's going to give me some of the basis to go on when coming up with the Japanese players, I believe. So I have a big spreadsheet here, and let me make sure you can see that. And so here are the top players on in the franchise of the Tokyo Giants or Yomiuri Giants, and so I've placed those in here, and then it was just a matter of going through and picking their best seasons. And what you see here is their actual stats for their best seasons. I'm not quite done with the pitchers yet, but I'm going through player by player to come up with those. And a couple of resources that I found very helpful. First of all, these players are all on baseballreference.com. So you can find them all there. And you can find all of their actual stats and that kind of thing. But not all of the stats are there isn't a lot of all of the stats, if that makes sense. Not all of the secondary stats or some of the more detailed analytical stats aren't included on baseballreference.com. And so another website that I found is npbstats.com. Nippon Professional Baseball, I believe, is NPB. And so if you go to npbstats.com, you can get access to some of those more in-depth statistics that I'm looking for. Not only batting, base running, fielding, those kinds of things that I'm going to use as the basis for the cards for the team that I'm doing here. And so using that as the foundation, their actual stats as the foundation, I'm going to make some adjustments based on the work that's been done by Jim Albright and others. And I think I'll get close to an approximation of what these players would have done in the major leagues. And again, I know not everybody will agree with the process, maybe, but I think in my mind this is kind of the way I want to do it. So that talks about the Japanese team. What about the Negro League team? That one, of course, Negro League stats aren't as well kept as the Japanese League stats are. However, there are some statistics. And Baseball Reference, for example, has an ever updating statistical totals for a lot of these players. And so what I did was I went to the Homestead Grays, and actually there's a great site called Seamheads where they have done a lot of the work in terms of updating the statistics for the Negro Leagues. And it's actually what I believe Baseball Reference uses is some of the Seamheads, the work that Seamheads has done. So you can go over here to seamheads.com and you can find Negro League stats. Here you have the Homestead Grays. And there's even a little tab for all-time teams that I used as the basis for the players that I wanted to use. And it's by position. And you get the wins above replacement for different players in different positions. And that's kind of what I use for the basis of this other card set, or these players that I'm going to be using in the league. That's how I've kind of filled the spots for the different positions and pitchers and all the other batting positions. So that was the basis for it. And then it was a matter of figuring out major league equivalencies for these players as well. And there were a couple of different resources that I used. And one of those is a site called Horsehide Dragnet, which is a blog from Eric Chalek. I'm probably mispronouncing that, so I apologize. But Eric Chalek, who has done a lot of work coming up with major league equivalencies for a huge number of Negro League players. He describes himself as a baseball blogger, Negro League analyst, and so forth. So this is his blog, I guess you will. And he's done a lot of work, and he's continually updating the major league equivalencies based on his formulas and so forth for coming up with those. And as you can see, this latest release was August 14th, so just a few weeks ago as the time I'm recording this. So the good thing about that is that if you come out here and you click on Negro Leagues, you have access to not only how he's formulated these equivalencies for the traditional stats, but you have access to the actual databases themselves. So you can download the database, and what you get is something that looks like this, where he's already done 349 batters and 209 pitchers. There's 102 that he is will be doing next, or is on the to-do list. And he even has some players who there's not enough data to use or to come up with major league equivalencies. So this is where I went. You can go to, for example, hitters, and it's a season by season list of major league equivalencies for all of these players. There, for example, I think Buck O'Neill was in there. Anyway, so you have access to all of these seasons and all of their stats, the major league equivalencies for all of these players that he's taken the time to do, and that's the hitters, and he also has done the same thing for pitchers. And so this has been just an invaluable resource for me when coming up with this, because then it was just a matter of finding the season I wanted to use for each of the Negro League players, and then coming over here to the list and pulling the major league equivalency stats out, and then that's what you see here in this line. Now, the caveat is that there were some players who I would have normally used who were not in the database, in this database, either because they haven't been done yet, or maybe they didn't have enough, the stats weren't good enough to port over, or whatever the case may be. I'm not sure exactly why some of them weren't in here, but there were a few that I couldn't do that with. Also, in the Negro Leagues, you had a lot of two-way players. So Ray Brown, for example, is both a hitter and a pitcher. And many of the Negro League players were like that. They would pitch and they were also hitters as well. And in the database, if they're pitchers primarily, they do not have the traditional hitter stat lines. They only have the pitcher traditional stat lines. So that made it so that I'm going to really limit how much I use players, two-way players, and that kind of thing. But players that weren't in the database, I just removed from my list here. Fortunately, that I still was able to find 2 players at each position, and I think 11 pitchers to use, and was able to use again, find all of the major league equivalencies for these players. And then, of course, I still, for those 2 teams at least, I'm going to use these stats, these major league equivalency stats, to come up with History Maker Baseball cards using the great guide that History Maker Baseball puts out, or Play Games puts out, to let you know how to formulate cards and how to calculate the cards and that kind of thing. So that's what my plan is for those 2 teams. I think I've probably rambled quite a bit and given you a lot more detail than you wanted. But for those of you who are interested in getting those equivalencies, those were the sites that I used to track those down, and what I would recommend. Eric is also, they have another site called the Hall of Miller and Eric, where he and I was going to say an accomplice, where you have the 2 of them analyzing, in this case, Japanese players, and they're going through how they're calculating major league equivalencies and that kind of thing. So if you just Google the Hall of Miller and Eric, you'll come up with the site, their WordPress site for that. And then Eric, as I said, has the separate site. He has his separate site, Horsehide Dragnet, where he specifically details the major league equivalencies for the Negro Leagues. All of this is getting me closer to starting the league. Very, very close to finishing up with this, and then we'll be off and running on the Triple-Elimination tournament. So if you're curious and want to follow that, consider clicking the subscribe button so you don't miss anything. And it should be very interesting to watch. I don't know if some of the top teams can make it all the way through, Triple elimination tournament means where I'm not playing series of games, I'm playing individual games. So, for example, the very first game will be the Yankees against the Mariners, New York at Seattle, or in Seattle here. And if New York loses that first game, then they drop to the losers bracket. A team can lose 3 games, and when they lose their third game, they're eliminated. So, otherwise, they continue working through the bracket, and whoever comes out on top of the American League and National League will face off against each other to determine who the top team is. And I really like it because anything can happen in a short series, and in this case, the series are very short. It's individual games, but a team does get to lose 3 times before they're eliminated, so that's kind of good. But anyway, hopefully you'll look forward to watching that as much as I am. And if you have any comments, leave those down below. And until next time, have a great evening.